Welcome to Walking the Haftarah. I'm Tyler Merwin, and this is Torah portion SHEMOT. This week's Torah portion is Exodus 1:1 through 6:1. The Haftarah this week is Isaiah 27:6 through 28:13, and chapter 29, verses 22 and 23. SHEMOT means names in Hebrew, as in the opening line of the Torah portion, which reads, "These are the names of the sons of Israel, who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher." Exodus 1:1, verses 1 and 2. This week we begin the second book of the Torah, SHEMOT, or Exodus. Let's do a quick review of the many events that are a part of this week's Torah portion. Our portion opens telling us that the whole generation of Israel who entered Egypt has died, and that Israel has multiplied greatly in the land of Goshen. Then arose a new king, a new Pharaoh, who ruled over Egypt, who had no regard, or says knew not, Joseph, and all that he did to preserve Egypt through the great famine. This Pharaoh feared Israel because they were great in number, and they hadn't assimilated fully into the Egyptian culture. They were still a set-apart people. He feared that if war broke out, he wasn't sure whose side Israel would be on. Because of this, he decides to enact full control over them by making them slaves to the state, hoping to break their spirit. But the more they were oppressed, the more Israel multiplied. The next trick up his sleeve was to have all of the Hebrew newborn baby boys killed just after birth. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. Exodus 1, verse 17. Also in Exodus 1, verse 22, it says, "Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." This was the scene that Moses was born into. His mother had hidden him for 3 months, and then put him in a waterproof basket and placed him in the Nile River. His older sister Miriam watched over him from the shoreline. Pharaoh's daughter goes down to the river to bathe and finds the basket with a crying baby boy. She then unknowingly hires the baby's mother as a wet nurse and to bring him up until he was weaned. Then he was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter and given the name Moses or Moshe, which means drawing out. And he grew up in the house of Pharaoh. Next, we find that Moses is now grown, and he goes out to see the labors of his people, where he sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave. Seeing no Egyptian witnesses around, he kills the taskmaster and hides his body in the sand. The next day, Moses was out and witnessed 2 Hebrews fighting with one another. When Moses intervenes, the aggressor replies to him, "Who made you a prince and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Exodus 2, verses 14 and 15. The priest of Midian, Reuel, who is Jethro, had 7 daughters that came to the well that day to draw water for Jethro's sheep. But the other shepherds came and tried to drive them away. Moses steps up and saves them and waters their flock. Moses dwells with Jethro and is given his daughter Zipporah, which means little bird, like one of the little birds you see hopping around, as a wife. And they have their first child, Gershom, which means foreigner or refugee, because that's of course how Moses felt in the land of Midian. Next we are told that the Pharaoh who sought Moses' life has died, and the children of Israel cried out to Elohim because of their harsh labors. God hears their cry and begins to act on their behalf, and on behalf of the covenant made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Next, we are back with Moses while he's shepherding sheep in the wilderness, where an angel appears to him through a burning bush. The bush is burning but not being consumed, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh himself calls out to Moses from the bush. Then he said, "Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Exodus 3, verses 5 and 6. God tells Moses that he has heard the cry of his people and will deliver them from Egypt and bring them back into the covenant land, a land flowing with milk and honey. He also tells Moses that he's sending him to Pharaoh to be the one to bring them out, a directive that Moses isn't very comfortable with. Moses asked God, by what name shall he say sent him to the children of Israel? God said to Moses, I am who I am, or I shall be as I shall be. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent you to me. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Exodus 3, verses 14 and 15. God lays out the plan. Moses will meet with the elders of Israel and let them know that their redemption is at hand. They are to request from Pharaoh to leave for a distance of 3 days journey to bring offerings to Adonai. He tells Moses that Pharaoh won't let them go until he is forced. But when he does, that they will plunder Egypt. Moses doubts that he will be believed, so God gives him 3 signs to accompany his words. A staff that turns into a snake, and then when grabbed again turns back into a staff. He gives him the leprous hand, where he puts his hand in his coat and pulls it back out as leprous. He puts it back in his coat, takes it back out, and it's healed again. And then finally, he would draw water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, that it would become blood. Moses complains and pleads to God that he needs to choose someone else to do this job. Primarily, he's using the excuse that he can't speak very well. God gets angry with Moses, but offers to let his brother Aaron do the talking for him. Moses gets leave from Jethro and takes his wife and sons and heads back towards Egypt. Moses and Aaron speak to the elders and show them the signs that they were given. And the people believed, and when they had heard that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had visited the people of Israel, and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshipped. Exodus 4, verse 31. Next, Moses and Aaron appear before Pharaoh and present their request to worship Adonai in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, who is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. Exodus 5:2. Pharaoh is not impressed and is angered that his slave labor force has stopped work all because of this. He commands his taskmasters to withhold straw from them, forcing them the additional task of finding straw in order to produce the bricks that they were making. All this without changing the daily required quota of bricks to be made. Pharaoh says that they are idle or lazy, and that's why they are requesting this leave. And he tells his taskmasters, let heavier work be laid on the men, that they may labor at it, and pay no regard to lying words. Exodus 5:9. The foremen are beaten for not producing the quota of bricks, and they complain to Pharaoh. But Pharaoh replied, but he said, you are idle. You are idle. That is why you say, let us go sacrifice to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Go now and work. No straw will be given to you, but you must still deliver the same number of bricks. Exodus 5, verses 17 and 18. The people who were excited about their soon deliverance now blame Moses and Aaron for their increased bitterness of their burdens. Moses in turn complains to Adonai about the evil being done to the people and that they have not been delivered. And the portion ends with, but Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moses, now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land. Exodus 6, verse 1. This strong hand is the hand of the Holy One. This brings us to this week's Haftarah, Isaiah 27, 6 through 28, 13, and 29, verses 22 and 23. Notice that this is the first Haftarah that isn't continuous. We jump all the way from chapter 28, verse 13, all the way to 29:22. This is not uncommon, as we will see in our continued studies. This has to do with one of the rules for all the Haftarah, that the reading should not end in a macabre or a distressing verse. Since all the Haftarah are taken from the books of the prophets, you can see where this can be an issue. The prophets bring us a lot of hard words of rebuke. They aren't usually filled with rainbows and unicorns. So when the selected reading does end in a downer, they will add a verse or two, usually to end on a positive or end with some hope. So now let's look at our Haftarah. In the days to come, Jacob shall take root, Israel shall blossom and put forth shoots, and fill the whole world with fruit. Isaiah 27, verse 6. The first connection to our portion is the phrase to come. It's a Hebrew word that is also in the opening verse of our Torah portion, where it's actually translated as came to, where it says, "These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household," which is Exodus 1:1. The sage Rashi sees this verse in Isaiah as alluding to the Exodus where Israel will take root in the land and blossom. This is also more understood to be an end-time statement where this will happen as a permanent state, with Messiah Yeshua being that ultimate root. He has struck them as he has struck those who struck them, or have they been slain as their slayers were slain? Measure by measure, by exile you were contended with them. He removed them with his fierce breath in the day of the east wind. Verses 7 and 8. Just like Pharaoh struck Israel, the Holy One will strike Egypt with plagues, measure for measure. Also remember that the east wind is symbolic of divine judgment. It was that east wind that split the Red Sea, which delivered Israel, but destroyed Pharaoh and his soldiers. Therefore, by this the guilt of Jacob will be atoned for, and this will be the full fruit of the removal of his sin, when he makes all the stones of the altars like chalk stones crushed to pieces. No asherim or incense altars will remain standing, for the fortified city is solitary, a habitation deserted and forsaken, like the wilderness. There the calves graze. There it lies down and strips the branches. When its boughs are dry, they are broken. Women come and make fire of them. For this is a people without discernment. Therefore, he who made them will not have compassion on them. He who formed them will show them no favor. Verses 9 through 11. The sins of Israel were atoned for in Egypt through harsh slavery, a punishment in exile that brought them to a place of redemption. We too are in an exile and a type of discipline as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh's people. Even though since most of us were born and raised here, it doesn't feel like it. The question is, can you fully follow the whole Torah as it's written in your current state? The answer currently is no for everyone, even if you're in the land. We will only be able to truly follow this out, and we will only truly be out of exile when Yeshua is in the millennial reign and we are back in that purified land with him. In that day, from the river Euphrates to the brook of Egypt, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh will thresh out the grain, and you will be gleaned one by one, O people of Israel. And in that day a great trumpet will be blown, and those who were lost in the land of Assyria, and those who were driven out of the land of Egypt will come and worship Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh on the mountain at Jerusalem. Verses 12 and 13. The river Euphrates refers to Assyria that will capture or glean the northern tribes of Israel. This being sent into exile is equated to being exiled in Egypt. The phrase "in that day" is a prophetic reference to the day of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. A great shofar will be blown, and all the exiles will be driven out of the foreign lands, just like Israel was driven out of the land of Egypt in the Exodus. The shofar blast is thought to be the Tekiah Hagadolah, which is the long blast that represents kingship, and that's the same blast that was heard on Mount Sinai. Again, like the Exodus story, we will be gathered to worship Adonai on the holy mountain at Jerusalem. Ah, the proud crown of the drunkards of Ephraim, and the fading flower of its glorious beauty, which is on the head of the rich valley of those overcome with wine. Behold, Adonai has one who is mighty and strong, like a storm of hail, a destroying tempest, like a storm of mighty, overflowing waters, he cast down to the earth with his hand. The proud crown of the drunkards of Ephraim will be trodden underfoot, and the fading flower of its glorious beauty, which is on the head of the rich valley, will be like the first ripe fig before the summer. When someone sees it, he swallows it as soon as it's in his hand. Isaiah 28, verses 1 through 4. Israel had become drunk on materialism and the ways of the world instead of being dedicated to the ways of the Holy One. The sages also see this as relating to our current exile, where many of God's people are more focused on the things of this world and worldly pleasures than on the Creator of the world himself. The first ripe fig is alluding to immature fruit. This should be foregone until summer, when it would be good and ripe. But because of worldly greed, they didn't possess the patience to even wait for the proper season. In that day, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh of hosts will be a crown of glory and a diadem of beauty to the remnant of his people, and a spirit of justice to him who sits in judgment, and strength to those who turn back the battle at the gate. Verses 5 and 6. Even in the day of judgment, there is always hope for those who trust in Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. These also reel with wine and stagger with strong drink. The priest and the prophet reel with strong drink. They are swallowed by wine. They stagger with strong drink. They reel in vision. They stumble in giving judgment. For all tables are full of filthy vomit with no space left. Verses 7 and 8. Their discernment and understanding is like that of a drunk people. They have none. Though I'm sure actual drinking and drunkenness was a real problem at that time, they were deluded by the waves of the world and became drunk on what they perceived to be their own success. The root of this is pride. To whom will he teach knowledge, and to whom will he explain the message? Those who are weaned from the milk, those taken from the breast? For it is precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. Verses 9 and 10. There is no one coherent enough to hear God's warnings from the prophet, only nursing children. And like the first generation brought out in the Exodus that could not stand, it would be their children that would go into the promised land, those that were nursing at first. Most of us have heard this text, this line upon line and precept upon precept, used in a positive light, but it's really not positive. The context here is rebuke, and it's actually seen as two different interpretations. One being that the people are so immature, it's like trying to train a toddler, just a little bit at a time, because that's all they can handle. The other view is that every commandment that was taught to them, they countered with idolatry, which they felt justified in doing because of how far they had fallen. Either way you look at it, this is not a positive affirmation. For by people of strange lips and with a foreign tongue, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh will speak to this people, to whom he has said, this is rest, give rest to the weary, and this is repose. Yet they would not hear. And the word of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh will be to them precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little, that they may go and fall backward and be broken and snared and taken. verses 11 through 13. Since they would not hear Adonai's words, calling for repentance from the prophet, they will hear the words of judgment from the strange lips of the Assyrians. Therefore, thus says Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, who redeemed Abraham, concerning the house of Jacob, Jacob shall no more be ashamed, no more shall his face grow pale. For when he sees his children, the work of my hands, in his midst, they will sanctify my name. They will sanctify the Holy One of Jacob, and will stand in awe of the God of Israel. Isaiah 29, verses 22 and 23. Our portion this week begins with the first exile of God's people in Egypt, and the Haftarah speaks of the coming exile of the 10 northern tribes to the Assyrians. But just like Egypt, the Holy One will redeem his people in every exile, if we, his people, will call on the name of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. No matter how far you have fallen, no matter the circumstance or the situation, the Creator of the universe has not given up on you. Yeshua's shed blood is sufficient for you and for me. Abstain from drunkenness and the cares of this world. Repent and call upon the name of Yeshua. And finally, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. I pray this teaching has been edifying. Let's lift up the name of the Holy One. With love, in Esad. Shalom.